Hello and welcome to the first episode of Track Talk, the series where we get in depth with creators about what motivated them to make their tracks, how they feel about tracks, and whatever else we happen to get into. So today we're looking at the Inhibitions series with one of the creators, Sheldon.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? So this is Inhibitions, the original Inhibitions. It was mostly a solo track. A lot of people don't know that I actually had a role in it. I created a few frames of this track, and I've seen this track sort of through its entire creation. Me and Dap were like good friends at the time, still are good friends, of course. But this midway through this track, I actually went and visited Dap in Memphis, where he lived, and we worked on the track together. And that's when we created the first Cramuel cannon. I forget who did. I think I created the first cannon, and he helped me do it. And then he actually implemented the Cramuel cannon into this track. Of course, before this, Cramuel reversals had been made and Cramuel stops had been made, but not a true from a stop Cramuel cannon or relative stop. This was actually made as a part of a battle royale between several other people, but I think this was the only track that was ever released, so he won by default. But yeah, that's why it says XY Battle Royale. I doubt you can see it on the screen, but that's why it was that way.
Yeah,
And we're just going to watch this. Yeah, we're going to watch this track at half speed so I can sort of make commentary on the tricks and how they rose. So it started out as an XY track, and I think it was started even before the battle began. I could be wrong, but man, that might not even be slow enough. So here's this. This is actually pretty advanced considering this was made in 6.7. This was prior to LineWriter Advanced or even LJS. So this Cramuel sort of outfling, it was made very tediously, like drawing like XY lines and using hit tests to delete the ones that weren't used. And this isn't the first instance of a Cramuel outfling, but there's a lot of Cramuels throughout this track, and prior to this, actually at its time of release, it had more Cramuels than any other track. So interesting fact about it. I don't know if it still holds true, but it might still be the most Cramuel to like non-Cramuel transitions in a single track. So,
Interesting. And what's the main premise of this track apart from being XY? You just trying to?
well, it's high speed in all blue, so there's no red line. So yeah, maintaining high speeds in an all blue XY track can be difficult, and a lot of times it takes long pinches. And this is sort of the first instance where pinches weren't the sole source of speed in a high speed XY track, with the advent of Cramuel cannons. So they were used to some extent in this track. So there was another instance of Cramuel usage here. And I think we're about to hit something pretty major here, which is, here's another Cramuel. And he did Cramuels for almost no reason. So I don't know. You actually can't see my cursor, but he made a two-frame. Well, actually, this is actually several frames. But in many instances, he made like a two-frame Cramuel just for the sake of it being a Cramuel. This might be the first instance of a Dapule, which is a fairly pointless trick, but he invented it nonetheless. It's a Cramuel tail chain, and the unfortunate part about Cramuel tail chains is that they're so weak that if you make them even more than barely just touching it, he'll pop out a Cramuel and die, essentially, which is why doing a Cramuel tail manual is incredibly difficult, just to do a flat Cramuel tail manual. And I think we got something pretty major coming up here. I doubt. Okay, so that was a Cramuel well. Another Cramuel well. I've got it paused on it. This track is some of the first usage of it. I think the very first usage of this trick was in Well-Tempered Manual.
Huh. If you can we go back and look at that one more time? Yeah, if you use the comma and the period buttons, you can actually go frame by frame. which might make it a little bit easier to see what's going on there. So this position, what did you call it?
Oh, it's a cramule well, but in this specific one, it pulls hard enough so that the butt is, in this instance, below the shoulder. So if the butt's below the shoulder, you'll have the Bosch looking like he's laying back on the sled.
Yeah.
If that doesn't occur, he'll still be in the normal position, you know?
Yeah, I kind of call it the easy boy. I didn't really know what the name for it is.
Yeah. But that's important because there are other instances where that there's not a distinguishment, or I forget the word for it, but between the position of the butt and the shoulder, and that's very important because there was something brand new in this track. It's actually, going like that. Okay, so here's some pretty cool, just XY flings, some of the strongest flings ever made in XY. Not the strongest, but very good nonetheless, considering this is 6.7. Okay, we're having a bit of loading issues doing this frame by frame jazz.
Yeah, you have to kind of do it slow, or you do get that issue. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and skip ahead a bit. Okay, so just there's a lot of pinches in this track trying to maintain speed, so that's sort of what's going on here.
Yeah.
I think we're about to hit something pretty important. It's a first that's never been done. I think it's coming up real soon.
So up until that point, the pinches were kind of the limiting factor of these all blue XYs.
Yeah, and I think I could be wrong, but I still think as far as gaining horizontal momentum, they're about your only option as far as all blue XY tracks go.
Yeah.
You can't even really make horizontal cramule cannons. They just don't do a whole lot. I mean, you can't make one in perfect XY either. You can make a reversal, but not from a stall cannon. It has to have a certain amount of angle to it. Okay, this is it right here. This is where it's going to happen. I believe, at least I thought so. Oh yeah, here it is. I don't know. It might skip the frame, but I hope it doesn't. Okay. Unfortunately, it actually skipped the frame, but
so is we singularity or something going on there.
Let's see if I can hit it on the blue replay, just for sake of continuity.
Yep.
Okay. Here it is. Here it is in the blue playback. This is a hypercramule, is what DAP called them. But essentially, what's happening here is a what is it? What is the right word for it? Possibly a display error or glitch. It just puts Bosch's body back to the default position because both the butt and shoulder are in the same, or basically in a singularity. They're in the same position.
Yeah.
So it displays the body as perpendicular to the sled when in fact, I mean, there really is no body. It's just two contact points. Because the body is essentially made up of two contact points, being the butt and the shoulder. Yep. So if they're in the same space, it just sort of doesn't know what to do, you know?
Yeah. So.
And this was the first time it was ever made. So that's what's interesting about all that.
Is this still in a cramule state, or is it a singularity now?
I guess the technical term for this would be it's a singularity of the shoulder and butt. Everything else is in a fairly normal position as far as the cramule goes.
Okay.
So let's see where we're at. Okay, so another pinch. This is a very pinch-heavy track. And just for the record, there is the production of a new track. We don't know. We don't think it's going to be Inhibitions. It's slightly different than the first three. Okay, yeah, there it was. That was I think the first instance of a cramule cannon used in a track. Cramwood claims he made one before even I made one, but it was never released, so it's hard to verify, you know. And I do believe that he did it, so it's really hard to say. This is the first instance of one used in a release track, so there is that. This was pretty revolutionary at the time. See, cramule, pointless cramules all the time, but they're there. So,
Yep.
And then some sort of, you know, flanules. See, all the momentum was lost, but, you know, you can regain upward momentum very quickly. Cramule cannons can be made upward and to the left, but they cannot be made to the right or down. There's some sort of weird game mechanics that prevent them from being made in those directions, but they just can't be. We've tried on so many occasions. They're just not the same. They're really so much weaker. It seems like there's some sort of mechanic blocking them from being made, and we're not entirely sure why.
So they cannot be made to the right or down?
Nope, they can't.
Huh. That's weird.
This is a bit of a downward section. And a cramule stop followed by a fairly large XY loop, you know, nose fling loop.
Yeah.
You can extend flings sort of by doing sort of an AS or an out fling type thing, like do a well, then push the nose in the opposite direction, and then do another well to continue the fling sort of artificially. And then here's an instance of a very long pinch. We can go ahead and skip the majority of it.
Yeah.
And he kind of tightens up near the end.
Yep.
Yep. And just sort of really quick bunch of cramules, bunch of G rolls, bunch of you name it, it's sort of going on here. That's sort of the problem with high speed. You lose it very quickly. If you do any sort of rolls, it just sort of dissipates. Using XY lines, you're either maintaining speed or you're losing it, really.
Yeah. One time to build up, very quick to lose.
That was pretty interesting sort of thing right there. Let's see if we, yeah, this is another pinch. Not that's not what I'm referring to. Let's see if, yep, okay. See, this is some of the first instances of hand behind, you know, body. It was pretty difficult to manage this sort of deal in 6.7. You had to be pretty lucky to do it, but there's that.
Nice.
Did sort of a roll with it, actually. And these wells are pretty strong considering the time period.
So in 6.7, what would be the tool differences between what we have now?
Well, so you have mostly the same tools. It's just when you place a line, the best way to make a track would be to make a flag right before the frame you're trying to do, and then you draw a line, press play with slow motion, try to see what happens in that frame. Then if you don't like it, delete the line and try again, and again and again and again. And that's sort of how it worked.
So it was like super.
It was
timed.
very, very tedious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing you could make that stuff back then.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of people were on the quit because the level of track making was so time consuming, given because the level of track making kept getting increasing, but the difficulty of making it also increased exponentially because it just took more of a grind, and we almost advanced past ourselves as far as track making because we didn't have the tools to do it. So we theorized all these things, but simply didn't have the tools to do it.
Yeah.
And for example, CF2 was an XY track / Omni I started, and I probably spent 500 hours on 50 seconds of XY, and it was a huge waste of time. I must admit now, but it's what it took to sort of make track of that magnitude. So there was an XY reversal, cramule reversal which is like it's a. Oh, this is weird. What's going on here? Okay, so it's basically a. What is it? Okay, so as you can see, it's a leftward cannon, and then he moves to the very end of it. I don't think it shows it in this. Yeah, we lose that frame here. But essentially, he would go to the very far right of it and then get bounced back. So it's
like recycled almost.
Yeah, it is recycled.
Oh, that's awesome.
Now, this is sort of the cooldown. Well, actually, it keeps going for a little bit, actually. This is where I actually participated in the track. I didn't make this part right here, but there's actually a recycle in this track where he recycles a pinch, or not a pinch, a flanule. And I was like, well, why don't he, and he got stuck, so I tried to help him get out of it. It was pretty common at the time. We would get stuck in our tracks and we'd just message each other, be like, hey, can you try to get out of this situation? We'd send the SOL around.
Yeah.
And that's sort of something, if we were trying to, we did that a lot in Inhibitions, Z and C. We would make a stack and then have all three of us working trying to survive it. Okay, see, here's the recycle. And coming up is the stack I made to get out of it, actually. It's coming up. Yep, there it was. And if that gives you an idea, sort of my level of expertise at the time, I mean, there you can't see it because it sort of skips it, but this is the stack that I made.
Yeah, that's pretty intense stack, especially given no tools. So you're kind of just going by feel, I guess. Like you kind of know roughly.
Yeah. You have some idea what the contacts are doing, but you don't really know for sure. So
yeah.
It was more so trial and error and like good intuition, I guess. So you just sort of develop what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But the end of this is just basic XY. I personally think it's kind of a lot of filler. So okay, so this is the first installation where Anton was involved. And we went by the Sad Boys, Sheldon, Anton, and Dap, Sad Boys. So intro by Cramwood.
Yeah.
So this actually started out as a solo track by Dap. He was making sort of a Woolsey XY, followed by XYZ, so it's sort of irrelevant at this point. And then he sort of hits this. Here's an interesting technique. This is a continued 45-degree chain that relies on rotation to get subsequent wells. We play more on this in Inhibitions C by using red lines to continue it almost indefinitely. And the truth with this track is it was one of the first XYZs ever made, and it's certainly the first high-speed one. So there's a whole lot more you can do with XY and Z lines that you can't do with just XY. And, we didn't use any singularity cannons either, so we were limited in that fashion. But you'll probably be able to tell as it goes on, we get better at it, and luckily it plays well with the track because it looks like there's a logical progression in intensity, but it's mainly because we just got better at doing it as we went on.
Oh yeah, as with many tracks.
Yeah. And it's sort of less intense here at the beginning.
So this is all X, Y, and 45-degree lines, is it?
Yeah, I think there were maybe one or two lines where we accidentally didn't draw an XYZ line, but we never really told anyone. So
yeah, I can see a few, I think. Or it might just be the blurriness of the
I don't
recording.
think there are any yet. Um, I think they're near the end of the track.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of happens though.
Yeah, so you just yes, this is another advent that we had. I don't know. This may have originated in this track. This might be the first proper use of it in a release track, and that is what we called a perpendicular cannon. So if you saw that back there, that was about the strongest we could make downward cramule cannons, and still that even took some survival lines to achieve.
What, those four lines?
Yeah. So this is 4 lines, and it took 3 survival lines to even get that. So it wasn't that all that strong. And this is what we call the perpendicular cannon. So it's sort of the predecessor to the singularity cannon. In a sense, it's like a cramule cannon, but you're pushing him along his plane as opposed to away from the plane, if that makes sense.
So you're pushing him along the length of that line in that direction upwards then.
Along, yeah. So see, it's along the length of the cramule. So as opposed to a cramule cannon, a typical cramule cannon in this position would send him to the right or left, you know, because that's, yes, this is a perpendicular cannon because it goes perpendicular to the plane of a cramule.
Huh, that's interesting because I didn't know stuff like that could actually be survivable. I mean, I've messed around and made similar things, but I've never seen a full, well, I kind of call them Christmas trees, but yeah, that's pretty cool.
I think this is where I started to work on the track to some extent. I think I made this fling right here. And the thing with XYZ flings is they can be made almost as smooth as real flings in chains, so it doesn't feel that much different.
Yeah, they're not like super hard to make.
Yeah, so you can make a track that is essentially very, very close to just a normal fling quirk. This track, for the record, is all blue as well.
Nice. And what was the main motivation behind this one? Just to display some of the new techniques? Like I see here, you've got a peg stretch going on.
Yeah, and I think this was before we realized sort of like that 6th iteration. We were doing it by mistake more so.
Right.
And yeah, and this is sort of like displaying new techniques and just sort of come together because we had really this was sort of the first time we sort of came together and made a track, and it was just like a good sort of bonding experience to like work together toward a common goal.
Sure.
And there was a lot of syncing here, like a lot of airtime syncing and all that.
Yep.
This is like an inverted shoulder chain. It might be the first one ever made. It's not like terribly groundbreaking by any means, but
it's very stable though.
that was another perpendicular cannon.
Yeah.
We did a lot of no rotation air times for syncing. That was a common theme in this track.
Yeah, I remember that particular shoulder pull as being pretty massive.
Yeah. This was I was pretty proud of that stop right there.
Yeah.
It was more so, I think it was shortly after the advent of LRA. We were just playing around. Like, it just felt like a new game to us, and it was sort of like a playground, you know? Everything was so much easier to make. We made this track over a course of maybe 2 months, maybe even less. It didn't take a very long time.
Yeah, that still seems like a long time to me. Like, I think I don't have very many tracks that I've spent that much time on.
Oh yeah. I think this is getting close to the drop, where we kicked it into high gear, so to say.
Okay.
Yeah, right before the drop. I would like to release a refined version of this because the one reel released is slightly off on the syncs, and it bugs me to no end, but I don't think most people can notice that much that it's that off sync, but bothers me a whole lot.
Yeah, stuff like that can drive you insane.
Here's a interesting cannon.
Yeah, it looked like it was doubled up.
It was, I think it was the beginnings. That was another perpendicular cannon.
Huh. But all perpendicular lines that time. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, there were no stabilizers there.
Oh yeah,
Pretty perpendicular.
Yeah. Looks like train tracks.
We're coming up on a pretty strong rightwards cannon. Or no. No, actually that's not yet. I like this part synced pretty well. I kind of liked what was going on there. Upward cannon. I really like the density of this track, like because it felt like there was a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, to anyone watching this with us, like, go and watch the original tracks for yourselves. I'll leave links to them all in the description of this video because I mean, right now you can't really feel the intensity that these tracks have.
Yeah, I would almost put a disclaimer at the beginning of the video, like if you haven't already watched the track, so go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I'm sure I will.
Oh yeah, that was a rightward cannon, and you see how much we had to pull the butt to even begin to survive that.
Yeah.
And then this is a survival frame after that, so you lose a whole lot of momentum surviving it. Oh, yep, diagonal cram mule. Some of the first use of that, we couldn't really do a whole lot with it.
So, what was the story behind the whole diagonal cram mule thing?
Okay, so the first diagonal cram mule ever made was made by me, and it was made in 6.7. And I was like, there's got to be a way to make diagonal cram mules. So I tried again and again and again, and I finally got one frame or two frames of a non-XY cram mule to survive in like sort of a roll fashion. I tried to roll it, but if you've ever tried to make an angled cram mule, you notice that you have to basically life lock it to get it to survive.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely will one actually survive. They'll sort of like flash in and out of survival. But I was doing it just attempt after attempt after attempt, and it just took ages.
So this was you doing this before LifeLock was a thing, right?
Oh yeah.
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 Yeah, that's
and then LJS came out, and I was doing it in LJS. Of course, LJS didn't have LifeLock, so I'd wait for a cram mule just to flash into existence, and that was still pretty much of a hassle. That's when I started well-tempered cram mule. Well-tempered cram, and then I eventually found a way to stabilize cram mule curves so that you could get almost every single one to survive more easily. It made it a whole. This is actually an example of a slag well, single-line anti-gravity well. Lone thought he removed them, so I thought I'd add them because they're interesting. People don't really do them anymore. If you don't know, lines, whenever you make a curve, they're actually in place to prevent Bosch from glitching through the lines.
Yeah.
While riding a normal curve, but you can exploit them to make sort of like invisible extensions of normal lines. And there's a sad logo. Yeah, that was a really actually. I don't know if any singularities were involved here. I think this is just a succession of cannons really quickly there. This is like the sort of like intense final section where we really went really hard, essentially. Oh yeah, there's another rightward cannon again. Oh yeah, and a critical reversal using slag wells.
I don't think I'd really noticed that at the time of watching the vid. That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of little details. Perpendicular. Another one of those things.
Yeah. Well, that went past pretty quick. What was that section?
That was a. Okay, that was a rightward cannon. Upwards and leftwards cannon into a upward cannon. And we neutralized that upward momentum pretty quick. Revolving fling.
Yeah.
That was a pretty strong downward cannon back there.
Oh, yep.
And of course, ending on a slag well stall.
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite parts of the whole track, to be honest. It's so cool.
Yeah. And that's sort of that. That's Inhibitions Z. And then we came back and we made one more, Inhibition C, where we used red lines and sort of went on the concept of cramule or singularity cannon exploitation. So we saw Ham and we went ahead and we also were doing better regular stacks too at the time. So we were just all around better players, really.
So to be clear, Ham was released between Z and this track C.
Yeah, Ham came out before this one did. And interestingly enough, Rhineliner participated in this, and it's the only collab he participated in the time he was here, and he's actually dropped off. He didn't respond to my message, considering the finishing of this track. He did not say a word. So he's been MIA ever since, essentially, his fling recycling track. So we don't know if he's even seen this track or not. So he did participate in it, though. So I sent him a message on IRTL. He sent me a thing back. He said, yeah, I'll work on it. And then it was a couple months, maybe a month or two later, he sent me a message back. I didn't even know if he'd ever get back to me. So he sent me that track that he had added.
Damn. Mysterious Rhineliner, eh? And if anyone hasn't seen Ham, go ahead and watch that before you watch this track. Because we should probably talk about the impact of Ham as well, right? Because up until Ham was released, people had never really, well, apart from theorizing them, no one had ever really made what we call singularity cannons. Is that right?
Yes. Singularities were done before Ham, but I don't think a cannon was ever done. And it makes total sense. As soon as we saw them, we were like, how do we not come up with that? It's this concept of multi-lining a single point, which is all of Bosch. So you don't ever lose sort of, you don't displace contact points erratically like you would whenever contact points aren't in one spot being affected equally, you know?
So that's what might happen in one of those perpendicular cannons, for example.
That's the limitation of cannons up to this point. Like if you had too much right or leftward momentum, you couldn't do an upward cramule cannon because it would displace contact points too much. But singularity cannon sort of eliminated that, and you could do however you would like. You know, you can make them almost anywhere. And obviously the predecessor to the singularity cannon is the 10-point cannon because they can be made with no momentum at all. Cranial or singularity cannons needed a certain amount of momentum to even create a singularity. So
yeah, the 10-point cannon definitely made a huge surge in popularity after JC made that video.
yeah, JC actually invented the 10-point cannon. Interestingly enough, he he's not necessarily renowned as the most technical player ever, but as far as like inventions, it's one of the most radical inventions ever made, I'd say.
Yep. Yeah, there's some really amazing things that can be done with 10-point cannons.
So the beginning of this track is much like Inhibitions. We sort of refined our rolling technique, and using red lines sort of makes everything a little bit smoother. Of course, you can multi-line and all that. Pretty sort of soft start, but it was calculated. We intentionally made this part less intense to sync better with the music.
Yep, and it's like you don't want to start at 10 straight away because then you have nowhere to go, right?
Yes. The end of this track, we probably hit about a 10. We sort of we initially were like, oh yeah, Inhibition C, let's use all kinds of color animation, and we only really did it in this one instance, so that it never really caught on. But there is a bit of that. There's a bit of green line exploitation.
Oh yeah.
And a little bit here near the end to sort of simulate that drum hit. And I think this is a lot of people's favorite moment right here. This, oh my gosh, sync right here.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I was pretty happy about that. Interestingly enough, on that sync, I actually lost speed right at the end. Like you can only continue a cranial chain until he loses his momentum, right?
Yeah.
And then you can't make it forward. But I barely had enough momentum to finish this one out, and it was actually really great. Like I think I made the last well at the last frame I needed for the sync. So
yeah, that was nicely done.
Actually, I think. Let's see, real quick. I think there's something right about here. No, okay, it's not yet. I don't know. This is just a bit of track. Nothing too out of the ordinary here.
Yeah, nothing.
This is a pretty interesting trick right here.
So that's another like recycle of a cranial cannon, I guess.
Yeah,
or sort at of least recycling the space, anyway.
Yeah, sort of like a squishy thing into a cranial cannon. Sort of had to place dots. It's pretty difficult to do for Anton. Anton made that.
Yeah, I've tried to do that myself. It's really tricky.
Right. I sort of skipped too far back, but okay. Right here, I could be mistaken, but I think this is the strongest traditional cannon ever made.
Oh my goodness.
We spent a long time trying to get this to survive, and I think he gains 150 ppf in one frame. So, and it's all interestingly enough, it's also downward and to the right. So one of the hardest combos to make.
Yes.
This is a stop I'm pretty proud of right here. So it's a singularity stop that uses the concept of pushing the singularity around. So these tiny little dots pushed him into this position, and he stopped, and he had like very little momentum after it. So it sort of was like a stark difference between speeds right there.
Yeah, it's a nice change up.
And they were sort of like we wanted to include cranial cannons or singularity cannons, but we didn't want to include too many because at the time working with all the red lines involved in making singularity cannons was a huge hassle. Like we were working on the Giga Quirk. We still are. We're sort of working on the Giga Quirk where we did a whole bunch of incredible stacks and singularity cannons, but we abused too many singularity cannons in that track and it became too slow to use too slow for me to work on, for example. There's a lot of rolls in this track where we try to keep them in the same position, but rolling, and it really has a nice, like, I think the best G rolls are when he maintains a consistent position. It looks the cleanest, and you can see the rotation the best. So sort of like this, where he's in the arm extended position. This was a roll where he reversed direction, and I think it had a really cool effect. This, oh yeah. This is actually pretty important right here.
Yeah, this looks pretty nuts.
This is an entire singularity section, and it might be the longest sustained singularity ever. It's like almost a full second.
So see, oh right, 'cause he doesn't ever come out of the position.
Yeah, it's not like a singularity airtime. Speaking of which, we've theorized ways to do this, and the ultimate way I thought of doing this was to make 2 entire frames of singularity in the exact same position. I'm talking every iteration, and I finally managed to do that, and it still didn't lock as far as an airtime went. Me and Conundrum tried to make a singularity spawn, but I think what we did by mistake was spawn the constraints in that position. So it was as if Bosch was a single point to begin with. Like he
but he
didn't have
looked
any
the
distance.
same, yeah.
Yeah, so and then we realized this, and we went ahead and it did crazy things like making his string like hundreds of units away from the body, and it was like a Spider-Man. He could swing from his string. It was really awesome. I wish we could do that with LRA because I totally messed around with it, make cool tracks with the string extended, for example.
Yeah, it must eventually be possible, I guess.
Hope for I'm not too good with LJS anymore, and I don't think it's too limited for my liking. If you're like an intermediate track maker, I mean, it makes sense, but I still even think the tools in LRA can be applied toward making like flat sled even. So,
well, yeah, I've only ever used LRA, though in a large part the reason I don't use LRJS is just pure laziness, not wanting to having to learn new keybinds, I guess.
well, yes, I was actually very proficient in LRJS, and I made Valence 3 in LRJS, but those were before LRA was really what it is now. They didn't even have live update. It was, you had to like sort of drag and wait for it to update, but then they updated LRA. So sort of the story with well-tempered cramule. Well, actually, we probably go on that in a different episode, but we were waiting on LRA and LJS to be compatible. And eventually, I just switched to LRA because me and Anton wanted to collaborate, and he used solely LRA, so it was sort of difficult for us to work together because if the two were compatible, they weren't cross-compatible at the time. I mean, they worked on the same physics engine, but you couldn't transfer the files. Yeah. Okay, this is where Ridenliner's part starts, and he does some of the craziest things we've ever seen. I mean, he just does some really crazy stuff.
So this is his part right now.
Like he did a XYZ cramule roll, and I don't.
Yeah, that is nuts. Like I have no idea how he did that.
Didn't even know all that was possible. And look at that, it just, this part right here is pretty insane. He pulls the butt in this weird sort of tube.
Yeah, I don't even know how he did that. The arms are like separated as well.
And then it sort of leveled out and got a whole lot less intense.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting. Forgot about all that. Let's see. That's an interesting little position.
What is that? Is that a...
It looks like a...
Or a sink.
Weird hypercramule sort of deal.
Yeah, it's like he's shifted them really far across in the cramule position.
So this is sort of like the period right before this second major drop.
There's another peg pull that went by. I think this is probably the first track where I'd really seen extended use of peg pulls.
Yeah, for it to really stand out, you have to make continued uses. Otherwise, it's just a couple frames; it just flashes by. You know, we sort of mastered repetitive use of these and how to continue them nearly indefinitely.
Yeah, Anton actually taught me how to make them, but they're definitely not. Well, they're kind of intuitive when you know the technique. Like it's a bit like other like it's a bit like flings in a way, where like a contact point will kind of allow itself to become more and more stretched over the frames. But it's certainly very interesting and odd how they work.
Yeah, the way they work is that a sixth iteration pull is the visible iteration, and if the average of the 6 iterations is based on just one iteration's pull, you can usually make that pull really strong, especially if it's only one contact point, because it averages out to like an insignificant amount of pull, if that makes sense. And so here's some instances of using singularities to instantly. I mean, they were back here as a means of let's see. Oh, okay, I went too far. As a means of syncing. So like right here, when we switched it, you can switch Bosch's orientation in one frame by using singularities. Here's another cranial ASDF, butt chain, shoulder. I think this part was pretty intense, and it's not just because I made it. I particularly liked it.
Yeah.
A reversing direction, inverted hand roll.
Jeez, what is going on there? Is that another huge butt pull?
Split hand.
Yeah. And you've got separate hands there, I guess. It's pretty crazy.
Version of that. I think this is the first use of continued body pull.
This one, yeah. Like
really
that one where
rip the body off the boss.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most impressive parts, I think, to the yeah, like stuff like this is probably the most iconic or impressive parts of that track, at least for me, and I think probably for most people, because even if they don't understand what you're doing, I mean, it looks like you've just pulled him straight off of the sled, yet he's obviously still alive.
Oh, yeah. And it's sustained and it's fairly consistent, and that's sort of the hardest thing about it.
Yep.
These are some really big pulls.
Yeah, like that one happened so fast. I think I might even have missed that in the original video. And then what's this, like an insane
shoulder peg? This is an example of the shoulder pull where you can use red lines to reverse the shoulder's momentum to a point where you can get another well.
Ah, so that's how that works. So you can keep doing it every single frame. That's clever.
Eventually, you eventually gain too much speed, but
yeah, I can see that happening. Yeah, like the recoil off the shoulder is pretty powerful.
Into with a Sheldon airtime, meant to look sort of like he's Superman flying away.
Yeah, it's
it sounded so like. Let's see. So you can sort of hear what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know. That little tune sort of reminded me of like a superhero sort of vibe, and I thought it looked like he was Superman flying away.
Yeah, that's definitely the vibe. I mean, it's kind of laggy on the call, but when you're watching,
probably can't see it the best.
Yeah.
If you're. But anyways, is there any questions about the series?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. So this track here is like the kind of culmination, you could say, like you, Anton, and Dap showcasing everything that you can do in the game.
Yeah, basically, and we've sort of like mulled over like creating an additional one, and it's just like the advancement really isn't there to like surpass what we've already done.
Yeah, because that would be what I'd ask you next. Like, what do you plan to do next? Are you kind of at another plateau in terms of like the current tools, or is it just
Yeah,
you think you?
sort of the plateau breaker for the last one was of course the singularity cannon, and we could of course do more with 10-point cannons, but just not like as much. And I think we personally hit a plateau as far as tools go. Like I don't think we can possibly get any better than a 10-point cannon because that's going from zero momentum and you can make them in any direction, almost any direction at any point in the track.
Yep, and
You
you
get as
can,
much speed as you possibly need.
and they're
So
far more useful in many cases than a
yes,
singularity is. Like you can do kind of illusions where things look like they teleport.
yeah, you can maintain position. You can even change position, but you can't do that with a singularity a lot of times because singularities usually invert Bosch. So you'll go into it in one position and you'll almost split backwards after it. So you lose that continuity.
Yeah,
I've seen some really interesting instances where Argolin's teleported him to one from one side of a circle to the other, like it was like nothing. It
yep,
literally looks like teleportation.
yeah. I did something similar in the endless track where I just copy and pasted the same image so that it looked like I could recycle him an extra time, and like you almost couldn't tell if you didn't know what a 10-point cannon was because it's hidden.
That's actually a good point. Like that actually makes me wonder what other things you could do with a 10-point because you could make it look like you're infinitely recycling something. You're recycling it again and again and again, but it's just like a different area with the
Yeah,
same exact track elements copied.
yeah,
And I think you could do. You know, you can if you cover up maybe the singularity or the 10-point cannons in a creative way, you could barely even notice them.
yeah. Like I had the eye of my channel logo like covering it so you couldn't see it.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, there
So
you go.
big.
That tell people. I mean, you can kind of tell because the camera like glitches, like it, so you feel like something's happened. But yeah, and I guess if that's everything for this series of tracks, I think we'll probably wrap it up there. Thanks for
Yeah.
taking the time to tell us about these tracks because like they are in terms of technique advancement. I guess you can say they're kind of for standard. You could say.
Yeah, they're one of those few series, or maybe the only series that truly documents court, technique progression over time. So
Yep. Yeah, it's awesome. And I think we'll probably leave that there. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comment down below, like and share the video, and see you next time. Cheers.